Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in AP English, and we turn in our study of the Odyssey to book 23. The Great Rooted Bed is the way that Fagles will title this book. This is, of course, the meeting, finally, between Odysseus and Penelope. Now, of course, technically they've met, as Odysseus was the old beggar. But here we finally get one of the great symbols in all of the Odyssey and the famous bed, and we get the great meeting. Let's go through really quickly from LearnStrong.net and the AP folder the review of the books where we've been. In book 1, the invocation of the muse, and Telemachus' mission is to grow up at line 340. In book 2, calls the assembly and ends up leaving with mentor Athena. Book 3, he's in Pylos with Nestor. Book 4, he's with Menelaus and Helen. Book 5, we meet Odysseus on Calypso's island, and then he finally gets to leave and heads towards the island of the Phaeacians. In book 6, he's with Nausicaa, the princess of the Phaeacians. And of course, along with Calypso and Circe, Nausicaa and Penelope, those are the 4 women that are kind of satellites in Odysseus' life. And then in book 7, we have him with the Phaeacians. In book 8, the Phaeacian Games. 9, 10, 11, and 12 are, of course, those flashback books. Book 9, Polyphemus. Book 10 with Circe. Book 11, the journey to the underworld. Book 12, Scylla, Charybdis, and finally the eating of the sun god's cattle. In book 13, the Phaeacians will return Odysseus back to Ithaca. In book 14, we will have Odysseus with Eumaeus, the swineherd. In book 15, we come back to Telemachus with Menelaus and Helen. In book 16, finally, father and son. So think about that one. In book 16, we have the recognition scene between father and son, and now in book 23, we're going to have that famous recognition scene between Odysseus and his wife Penelope, leaving us in book 24, the final recognition scene with the family, the important family members of he and his father. Book 17, we have Odysseus at the palace, dressed, of course, as the old beggar. Argos, his dog, dies. Book 18, we have the fight between the other beggar, Iris, and Odysseus. Book 19, we have Odysseus and Telemachus hiding the weapons. And of course, Odysseus will speak with Penelope, but there as a beggar. So from book 19 to book 23, we have that. We have the events that occur in between in terms of the cleansing of the house, as it's sometimes referred to. Book 20 starts the longest day of the Odyssey. All of the missed signs. Theoclymenus will make his observation. Odysseus gets an ox hoof thrown at him. Book 21, we have Odysseus stringing the bow. And as well making his revelation to the swineherd Eumaeus and the goat herd, the cow herd Philotius. And then finally in book 22 we do have that terrible Jack scene where all those suitors and the 12 women get hanged, and of course they do terrible things to Melanthius. Now all of that has happened, and then we will pick up with book 23. Just to remind, I hope that you're using these lectures along with your own reading. Let me exhort you to do so. Certainly by this point in the Odyssey, you ought to be able to pick up the book and the poem and read it all on your own, and then let me help you in our learning theory. Let's remind you about that desire to connect new information to old information in unique and meaningful ways. We do that in our annotated process at level 1 summary. At level 2, what does the text mean? At 2A, themes, messages, and at 2B, we're concentrating on symbol and irony. We're going to see a whole lot of both, but obviously the symbol of the bed is going to be huge in this book. Then finally, at level 3, how can I relate to this information in terms of the Iliad? Just think about that. Book 23 of the Iliad, after Achilles has killed Hector, are the famous games of Achilles. Here we're going to see actually a way to tie those two books together, and we'll get there later. And then finally we'll ask, how can I relate to this information personally? So a real brief summary of book 23. Euryclea will go to Penelope and say, he's here. She will not believe him, and in fact she threatens her to some degree and says, if it wasn't for the fact you were an old woman, I'd jack you. And Euryclea keeps saying to her, no, and then tells her, I saw the scar. Some have often asked, why doesn't Odysseus show Penelope the scar? And the answer is, Penelope knows that the man has the scar because Euryclea has told her. Penelope then will go to downstairs to where Odysseus is, back to it. Odysseus, however, is still covered in blood and guts in his beggar outfit. And Penelope, we're told, won't talk to him. She sits in silence and looks at him, so much so that Telemachus will say something mean about his mother and how hard she is. And we'll talk about maybe what actually is going on there. Finally, Odysseus will bathe. He'll come back looking beautiful because Athena has enhanced him. And they play a game, he and Penelope, where Penelope will test him. And it all has to do with the fact that there's a famous secret between the two of them. The entire palace was built around a huge olive tree, and the bed was constructed as part of the tree, using the tree as part of the bed. Penelope says to her nurse, hey, let's pull Odysseus' bed out into the hall and let him sleep outside of the room. And immediately Odysseus says, who moved my bed? That's impossible. And of course, Penelope immediately recognizes who it is. Meanwhile, Odysseus has told Telemachus, we've got to make sure that we don't have a whole lot of problems with the families of the suitors. So let's throw a party and keep the doors locked, and everybody will assume that Penelope has married one of those suitors. Meanwhile, to finish the book, we have the famous conversation between Odysseus and Penelope. He will review all of the events of the books 9 through 12 flashback. And then Athena, we're told, wants these two to have their opportunity to tell stories, and of course to make love as husband and wife. And then finally, the most important thing, get some sleep. Odysseus and Penelope both need it. So Athena will extend the night. It's nice to have a goddess on your side, right? And then finally in the morning, we'll have the last day of the Odyssey as Odysseus will rise. He knows that he's got to go and meet his father, and he knows that probably he's going to have to deal with the families of the dead suitors. Let's turn now to actual lines from this book. And as I've said, guys, every time I've hit one of these books with you, I keep saying to you, this stuff is really fun to read out loud, and I wish that I could read it all, but I can't. But at least we'll look at a few lines, opening lines of book 23. Up to the rooms, the old nurse clamored, chuckling all the way, so she's excited to tell Penelope. To tell the queen her husband was here and now, home at last. Her knees bustling, feet shuffling over each other, till hovering over her mistress' head, she spoke. Penelope, child, wake up and see for yourself. We're back to this mantra about sight and seeing. With your own eyes, all you dreamed of. We're also back to the dreaming thing of Penelope. Of all your days, he's here, Odysseus. He's come home at long last. He's killed the suitors, swaggering young brutes who plagued his house, wolfed his cattle down, rode roughshod over his son. Any chance that the poet has to remind his audience that the suitors got what they deserved because of all the terrible things they did, certainly going to be mentioned. We're going to see that mantra several times in book 23. We'll have the skeptic in Penelope, who is very much the same kind of skeptic that Odysseus was when Calypso told her it was time to go. And we saw Odysseus several other times meeting Athena, for example, when he got back to Ithaca. The skeptic, Penelope's the same way. She's going to give us a reason, by the way, when she speaks to Odysseus about why she's so skeptical. We'll wait and we'll get there. Then Penelope will tell Euryclea, she says, at line 15 or so, the gods have unhinged you. You were once so sane. Why do you mock me? Haven't I wept enough? Telling such wild stories. And this wild stories things makes us think about the stories within the stories of the Odyssey. Interrupting my sleep. Sweet sleep, she says. Not once have I slept so soundly since the day Odysseus sailed away to see that cursed city destroyed. We're back to that wonderful translation using T.E. Lawrence. I call it, I hate to say its name. Euryclea will say, I'm not mocking you. He's the stranger, she says. They all manhandled in the hall, line 30. This stranger, by the way, put it in your notes. We're going to see this. It's fascinating the way the word stranger gets used in the Odyssey, and especially the way it gets used in this book. Both Penelope and Odysseus are strangers to each other for obvious reasons. And then Euryclea will tell Penelope, Telemachus knew he was here for days and days, and then a little bit later she's going to say, I knew as well. In other words, Penelope is the last to know. There is one argument, by the way, that the reason Penelope treats Odysseus the way she does is she's kind of torqued at him. Really? Really? So you're going to tell your son and your nurse, but you're not going to tell me? What's up with that? And to that degree, she might not talk to him. She says, Telemachus knew for days and days, but he knew enough to hide his father's plan so he could pay those vipers back in kind. Then Penelope will jump up, her heart bursting with joy. She will hug Euryclea, and she asks, how did it happen? And Euryclea will say, I don't know. I didn't see it. I just heard it, right? Because we were all in terror, locked in a room in line 45. She says, I found Odysseus. There he stood at line 48. All around him, over the beaten floor, the bodies sprawled in heaps, lying one on another. How it would have thrilled your heart to see him splattered with bloody filth. A lion with his kill. We know that word picture from the Iliad, obviously. And now they're all stacked at the courtyard gates. He's lit a roaring fire. He's purifying the house with cleansing fumes. And he sent me here to bring you back to him. Follow me down. So now, after all the years of grief, you too can embark. You too can take another Odyssey. Loving hearts along the road to joy. Look, your dreams put off so long come true at last. He's back, alive, home at his hearth, and found you. Found his son here, still here. And all those suitors who did him wrong, he's paid them back, he has, right in his own house. Penelope will say it one more time. Hush, dear woman, guarded Penelope cautioned. Don't laugh, don't cry in triumph. Exactly what Odysseus said to her in Book 22, line 436, about gloating over the dead. You know how welcome the sight of him would be. And then she says, but the story can't be true. Not as you tell it. No, it must be a god who's killed our brazen friends up in arms. Right? This idea that it wasn't Odysseus, but it's some gods who have done it, will allow Penelope then to go through the test. However, at line 80, Euryclea will say it. No, trust me, she says. All this, she says, I'll give you a sign, a proof that's plain as day. That scar made years ago by a boar's white tusk, I spotted the scar myself when I washed his feet. I tried to tell you, but he told me I couldn't say a word. In other words, I knew as well before you knew. And then Penelope says it, line 90. Deep as you are, my friend, you'll find it hard to plumb the plans of the everlasting gods. It's a fascinating line. It speaks in so many ways to the opening lines of the Odyssey in Book 1, when Zeus says it's not our fault as gods that these humans have all this pain. All the same, Penelope says, let's go down and join my son so I can see the suitors lying dead and see the one who killed them. We're back again constantly to this notion of sight. In other words, I'm not going to believe it until I see it with my own eyes. Penelope then, down she goes. But we're told, like Odysseus, between Scylla and Charybdis, she's torn about how she's supposed to respond to her husband if in fact this is it. For example, should she keep her distance, probe her husband, or rush up to the man at once and kiss his hand and cling to both his hands? As soon as she steps across the floor of the stone threshold, line 98, slipping in, she takes the seat to the closest wall, radiant in the firelight, faced Odysseus. Now, there he sat, leaning against the great central column, eyes fixed on the ground, waiting, poised for whatever words his hardy wife might say when she caught sight of him. A long while, she sat in silence. I think this is just brilliant, brilliant storytelling. You would know, I mean, the poet does this a lot for us. Homer does this a lot. The thing you would expect is the thing that doesn't happen, right? So what would you expect? Penelope would come down. She would see all the suitors dead. She would see her husband there. She would run up and give him a hug. Not what happens. You might assume Odysseus, finally, I mean, he knows he's been with Penelope, obviously, to talk to her, but knows now he can tell her. You would think he would run up and say, I'm so sorry that I didn't die. I'm back. None. Both sit in silence. There, both of them sat in silence. Numbing wonder filled her heart. Line 105. As her eyes explored his face. It's wonderful that Fagles uses the verb here, explored, because obviously it's so closely aligned to Odyssey. In other words, we have Odysseys within Odysseys within Odysseys in the great poem, don't we? Her eyes explored his face. One moment he seemed Odysseus to the life. The next, no, he was not the man she knew. A huddled mass of rags was all she saw. Was he a man or was he a dream? That mantra we've heard before. Telemachus cannot believe this. He doesn't attack dad, he attacks mom. Cruel mother, he says at 112. You with your hard heart, why do you spurn my father so? Why don't you sit beside him, engage him, ask him questions? What other wife would have a spirit so unbending, holding back from her husband, home at last for her, after bearing 20 years of brutal struggle? Your heart was always harder than a rock. Let's point out two things here. Penelope is a strong, strong female, but she has to be, doesn't she? And then secondly, Penelope, she may have her own games that she's playing with Odysseus. There is a reading that says that Penelope has known for some time who this is, but she couldn't believe that he wouldn't tell her. And the fact that he told his son and his nurse but didn't tell her, ooh, okay, all right, we're going to deal with this. The way we're going to deal with it is through silence. But notice Odysseus, right? Penelope, by the way, comes back and she says, I'm stunned with wonder, powerless. Cannot speak to him, ask him questions, look him in the eyes. But if he is truly Odysseus home at last, make no mistake, we too will know each other even better. We too have secret signs known to us both, but hidden from the world. There's basically two kinds of signs scholars have pointed out that Odysseus can use to show who he is. One is an obviously physical kind of thing, where, for example, he can show a scar. The other is a situation like an emotional thing, some tie to something in the past. Obviously, with Telemachus, he can't do either. Telemachus doesn't know anything about that scar business, and he certainly doesn't have any emotional ties. When he left, Telemachus was a little boy, right? With Penelope, he will not show her the scar, although she already has been told that it's there, because he's going to, as she says, they're going to exchange the sign in secrets. Odysseus, we're told, at line 125 to 128, long enduring, broke into a smile. And he says to Telemachus, leave your mom here in the hall to test me, as she will. She soon will know me better. Now, because I'm filthy, wear such grimy rags, she spurns me. Your mother still can't bring herself to believe I'm her husband. And then he asks Telemachus, what's the best defense? The fallout question is the next thing. All these suitors are dead and their families are going to be mad. So he says, Telemachus, we got to figure out something. Let's figure out something. Telemachus comes back to him at line 140 and he says, no mortal man can touch you here for strategy. But we're behind you, hearts intent on battle, nor do I think you'll find us short on courage, long as our strength will last. We're going to see this as well from Telemachus in book 24. The young man saying, I'm there with you. Whatever you need from me, I'm ready to show it to you. The plan is to bring in Phineus to begin the singing and the dancing, and this will allow them to slip away, right, and wait for Zeus, the winning strategy that Zeus will provide. That way, if anybody hears the singing, they'll know that the singing and the dancing is because a miracle has occurred at line 167, and finally married one of the suitors. The idea is then that the people on the outside would start talking, and even talk about Penelope as a callous woman, too faithless to keep her lord and master's house to the bitter end till he came sailing home. So they'd say, at line 170, blind to what had happened, the great-hearted Odysseus was home again at last. Then we've got the bathing, we've got Athena's enhancements, the curls of hair like hyacinth clusters full of blooms. Put this in your notes at 3A. When we come back to our study of Milton's Paradise Lost, we're going to study a lot about hair. The way hair factors in Paradise Lost will have a lot to do with what's going on in the story. And of course, Milton knew well this set of lines. We get a really good epic simile as the master craftsman washes coal over beaten silver. This is at line 178. The god of fire and Queen Athena trained in every fine technique and finishes off the latest effort, handsome work. So Athena lavished splendor over his head and shoulders now. He stepped from his bath, glistening like a god, and now he's ready to talk to his wife. And what he says to his wife is fascinating at line 186. Strange woman. Notice how the word strange keeps getting used. So hard. The gods of Olympus made you harder than any other woman in the world. She'll mention it a little bit, Helen, by the way. What other wife could have a spirit so unbending, holding back from her husband? Home at last for her, after bearing 20 years of brutal struggle? Come, nurse. Odysseus is going to test Penelope, too. Make me a bed, I'll sleep alone. She has a heart of iron in her breast. Penelope will come back at line 193. Strange man, wary Penelope said. I'm not so proud, so scornful, nor am I overwhelmed by your quick change. You look, how well I know, the way he looked, setting sail for Ithaca years ago aboard the long-oared ship. And then Penelope plays the game of the bed. Come, Euryclea, move the sturdy bedstead out of our bridal chamber, that room the master built with his own hands. Take it out now, sturdy bed that it is, and spread it deep with fleece, blankets, and lustrous throws to keep him warm. In other words, Euryclea, move the bed out into the hallway, putting her husband to the proof. But Odysseus blazed up in fury, lashing out at his loyal wife. Woman, your words, they cut me to the core. How could you move my bed? Impossible task, even for some skilled craftsman, unless a god came down in person, quick to lend a hand, lifted it out with ease and moved it elsewhere. Not a man on earth, not even at peak strength, could find it easy to prise it up and shift it. No, a great sign, a hallmark lies in its construction. I know, I built it myself. No one else. And then we get the history of the tree. It is an olive tree, which will immediately make us think about Athena. Obviously, you'll remember earlier when he arrives at Ithaca, he and Athena sat under an olive tree, right, to do their conversation in book 13, line 426. He says it. He says, I made that bed. I gave it ivory inlays, gold and silver fittings, wove the straps across it, oxhide gleaming red. There's our secret sign. I tell you our life story. It's wonderful. That is to say, we are the stories we tell, that we exchange, the stories we accept and reject. Here it is. I tell you our life story. Does the bed, my lady, still stand planted firm? Now let's put it in our notes. Obviously we've got some symbolism that's powerful. One of the great symbols of the Odyssey itself, right? Notice how it will reference three different things. Obviously the marriage of Odysseus and Penelope is being considered here in terms of the bed. Obviously Athena and her involvement in the lives of both of them. That is to say, Athena's tree is the olive tree. And obviously Penelope's fidelity, her faithfulness to Odysseus. She didn't mess around. No man's been in that room at all, you know. And then we get it at line 230. Living proof. Penelope felt her knees go slack, her heart surrender, recognizing the strong, clear signs Odysseus offered. She dissolved in tears, rushed to Odysseus, flung her arms around his neck and kissed his head and cried out, Odysseus, don't flare up at me now, not you, always the most understanding man alive. We wonder about Odysseus being the most understanding man alive, right? Melanthius might have a thing or two to say about that. The gods. It was the gods who sent us sorrow. And here we are, back to, at the end of the Odyssey, we come back to, I told you this is a poem of circles, right? We come back to the opening lines in book 1, line 37, when Zeus said, it's not the gods' fault that humans experience so much pain. He mentions Aegisthus there. The gods, it was the gods who sent us sorrow. They grudged us both a life in each other's arms from the hazy zest of our youth to the stoop of old age. Penelope points out what is sometimes lost, and I think you guys maybe want to make sure and put this in your notes. This is a profound insight. Penelope